Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Carter. I'm an application engineer with Ally PLM Solutions. I want to welcome all of you to the Ally PLM NX Lunch Bites series. For those of you that may not be familiar with our Lunch Bites, our Lunch Bites is a series to briefly explore some capabilities within NX that are often overlooked. Please check our website for upcoming Lunch Bites topics and dates. We have a Lunch Bites page there. We also want our lunch bites to be valuable to everyone, so please let us hear your suggestions for future lunch bites topics. If you could send those to us via email, or there's also a place on our website where you can suggest a topic. We record those, and the more hand raises we get in a specific area, we start scheduling those and creating presentations for our topics. If you have any questions regarding today's session, just please write them down and send them in an email as well. There's several of you on the line with us today, so you'll be in listen only mode. Today's topic is on layers. So our agenda for today is what are layers if you're not familiar, why are layers used, some of the layer commands, and just an idea about template setup around layers. So first of all, layers. Layers provide a way for us to organize our files, the internal objects of the files. They're going to help us manage visibility. Yes, we have hide and show commands, or blank and unblank, like they used to be called, inside of NX. But if we put an object on a specific layer, we have more control about how that layer is going to behave, not only for the organization and us navigating and the visualization of the part, but even downstream in the drafting or assemblies. They're invisible containers. I kind of think of them as groups, but I hesitate to say the word group because there are some items called grouping inside of NX. But basically, it's that container that houses the object, and you can make it visible, invisible, or visible only, which would make it non-selectable. So why use layers? I think we kind of said it. With all the object or data in your model, the different features, the data types, whether it's sketches or solid bodies or sheet bodies or datum features, being able to turn that on and off cleanly can be very useful. Layers can be set to invisible in a given view, for example, a custom model view or even a drawn view. Okay, just a note about standards at your company, in this case layer standards. You want to check and see if there are specific layer standards at your company. There may be different layers, different structure for how you need to use layers, meaning if I have a sketch, I need to put that sketch on a sketch layer. And sketch layers may be a range of 21 to 40. Right, that may be the layers we put sketches on. Or we are supposed to put all the solid bodies on one of the layers between 1 through 10. Right, so the first thing you want to do is check and see if there are layer standards at your company. You also might want to think about implementing layer standards at your company. Well, why would we want to implement layer standards at your company? Well, we have several people, several users working with the same data, the same part files. So it's going to allow users to quickly interrogate any file, determine the complexity, turn on and off layers to make it easier to use, right? No matter who the author was, if somebody else created a file and then 6 months from now it's my job to edit the file or make an engineering change order, if we're all using the same layer standards, it's going to give me a head start on manipulating his or her geometry. This means that templates should be set up to have that layer structure, and all users are on board to put the objects on the different layers. Right? It's up to the users, up to us to use these layers the way that it's set up in our company. And these categories or the structure of our layers is something that's going to make sense for your company's industry or business. So the different commands. Here I'm using NX9, so I have a screenshot of the ribbon. So if you look at the View tab, you see I have the layer tools here. So this tool that has the 1, that's the work layer. We can type in a particular layer. Whatever layer we type in, that's the active layer, and any new object we create after that point will be on that specific layer. We have the command to move to layer, and we have layer settings. We're going to spend a lot of time going through the layer settings command. That's probably the most used command when talking about layers. That's the commands in the ribbon. If we look at the pull-out menu, if we go to Format, here's Layer Settings, Layers Visible in View, Layer Category, Move to Layer, and Copy to Layer. So here's a few screenshots of layer settings, and like I said, this is going to be the command we're going to spend most of our time here today. We're just going to kind of work top to bottom through the command and look at different ways of building categories, adding categories, using categories, different ways to apply a work layer and apply the different status, if you will, of the layer, whether it's visible, invisible, or visible only. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Alright, so here I have a model, and in this case this particular model only has one solid body, but as you know, we can have multiple solid bodies. In this particular model we have a couple sketches, have a datum plane for construction in here, and then the solid body. So if I go to the View tab, here are the commands on the ribbon. So here's make work layer, move to layer, layer settings. If I go to the pull-out menu and I go to Format, Layer Settings, Layer Visible in View, Layer Category, Move to Layer, and Copy to Layer. So as I mentioned earlier, I am using NX9. If you are still using 8.5 or older, you'll see that here's the same Format pull-down menu, and then in your utility toolbar you'll have layer settings. One also, just in case I forget to mention this later, here in NX9 you see that this is Make Work Layer. Make Work Layer is also here in this top border bar. But if you are running 8.5 and older, you can turn on this work layer dialog, so that instead of going into layer settings to make the work layer, you can just type in the value and then that's your work layer moving forward. So like I said, you can add that to a toolbar. Customize your user interface. Alright, so let's go ahead and click on layer settings to start off. I'm going to hit reset in my dialog just so mine's kind of the default layout, and the first time you go into your layer settings command it would look similar to this. And we're just going to kind of work top to bottom and kind of work through some of the options and how to manipulate this dialog. First of all, you'll see Find Layer from Object. So I mentioned that I may be coming in here and using looking at somebody else's model. I need to make a change to it, and yes, we may have our company standards, so I know that I need to go to probably layer 21 through 22, 23, somewhere in that range to look for a sketch. But if I want to make sure, I can come in here and just, it says select object, and I can click on this sketch element, this object, and it shows me that 21 is the layer that is on. Actually, let me go back in there. If I come in here and grab this sketch, you'll see that that's showing me that it's on 22. Also, we're going to talk about visible and invisible status, but if I come in here and I hide 22, you see that that sketch is turning on and off. If I go to 21, you see that that first sketch, the rectangular sketch, is turning on and off. So that's another way I can validate that. So you can pick it graphically and say, hey, what layer is that on? It'll show you. Outside of that dialog, just a little extra bit of information. If you go to the information pull down menu and go to object, and I pick that sketch again for example, in the information window it'll also tell you what the particular layer is for that feature, or in this case the object. So that was information object. Let me go back into layer settings. I mentioned here is another place to create the work layer. So I can type it in here. As I mentioned, I could type it up here in this particular tool. I can type it up here. It's the same work layer. You can also double click to change work layers. Alright, so we haven't talked about categories yet, but you see that I have one sketch on 21, another sketch on 22. Maybe I want to put another sketch on 23. So I'm going to go ahead and make 23 the work layer. So 23 is a work layer, which I could have typed here. If I want to go ahead and create another sketch, I'm just going to come out here, put it on the center plane. Maybe I need to put some kind of cutout shape to this particular part. And let's do it this way. I'm going to go ahead and do an open profile. Let me get rid of that line. And let me just draw an arc. So I'm just going to draw an open arc. Obviously I'd apply some kind of dimension to that. So I have my sketch. So if I go back to layer settings, I'm going to change my work layer so I can change the visibility of 23. And you see as I turn that on and off, 23, that arc sketch is being turned on and off. As I mentioned earlier, I could go ahead and select it and then show me that that's on 23. So I made 23 my work layer. Every object I create after that point is going to be on 23. Later we'll talk about, well, what if I forget to change my work layer? Can I move an object to another layer? And the answer is yes, we have moved to layer. So let me go back to the excuse me, the layer settings. We talked about selecting the object to find what layer it's on, the work layer. Now let's look down here in the guts of the dialog where it says layers. We'll come back to category display here in a minute. So here I have a list of some particular layers, right? There's one and it jumps to 21. Well, notice I have this filter down here. It says layers with objects. So every layer that has an object, sketch object, datum plane, solid body, etc., is going to show up in this list. If I change this filter to all layers, then all the layers in NX are going to show up. So if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that there are 256 layers. Okay, and sometimes I get the question, well, what if I'm not going to use all those layers? How do I delete them out? And the answer is you do not delete them out, you just don't use them. Right? If I don't need all 256 layers, I just don't use the ones I don't need. Just forget they're there. It doesn't matter. You don't delete them out. So we have all these layers displayed. You'll notice there's a couple other filters, all selectable layers and all visible layers. Okay. Well, all selectable layers, this is the visible only idea. So that means that you can only see it, which in turn means that it's not selectable. Okay, so I'm going to turn this back to layers with objects, and we had just put that last sketch on layer 23. If I make that visible only, see how I can select it here? It's because I'm in the layer settings, but if I get out of the dialog, notice how that sketch is not selectable. It's visible only. So if I go back into my layer settings and say all selectable layers, I'll have to scroll down here a little bit, but notice how 23 is left off the list because it was selected as visible only. Okay, I'm going to change this back to layers with objects and make that layer visible and selectable because it's shown. And if I turn off, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back to all layers. If I turn off 2 and 3, I don't have anything on there, but if I turn them off and change this to all visible layers, notice how it doesn't show up 2 and 3. So these filters where it says show are going to help you manage this long list of layers. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this back to layers with objects. So once again, the red check mark is basically the hide show, or what we call visible or invisible. If I right click on the layer, you see I can make it visible only or invisible, which would be the same as turning on and off the check mark. We'll talk about some of the other options here in a minute. Also down here underneath this layer control, you'll see these commands: make selectable, make work only, make visible only, make invisible. They're the same commands as either using the check marks or the right click. So some people like right click, some people like selecting a specific command. So if I have 23, I can say, okay, let's make it visible only, and see how it adds the check mark. So it's just your preference. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the layer control. Actually, before I do, there is another bit of information here. There's an information command or option you can pull up, and that'll pull all your layer information out into a text file. So that's what that does. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the layer control. Excuse me. So we've talked about the work layer. We've talked about visible, invisible, and visible only, which means it's not selectable. If I come over here and I look at the columns in here, we have a name column, which is the layer number. We have the visible only status. Okay. We have the object count, so it tells us how many objects are on that particular layer. And notice here is a category column. So it says that layer 1 is part of solids, 21, 22, and 23 are part of sketches, that's why I put them in there, and then 61 and 62 are part of the datums category. Okay, if I right click on a column, you can go to columns, and I could also turn on description. We'll look at description here in a minute. Also underneath columns there's configure columns, and you can reorder the order kind of left to right of those particular columns. Okay. Now, while we're talking about categories, you see there's a checkbox here for category display. So I turn on category display, and I'll bring this back over here in a minute, and notice how it kind of cleans up the long list. Now, it wasn't that long because I had layers with objects, but if I change this to all layers, right, we don't see the 1 through 256 at this level. Now you do see a category called all. If I branch that open, then that is 1 through 256. But this is where we're really going to start talking about our layer standards at our company. Obviously 1 through 256 can be used a certain way at our company, but having this category display turned on, and we can say, well, all our curves, anything that's a curve, is going to be on one of these layers, right? 41 through 60. If it's a datum feature, it's going to be on 61 through 80. Or if we're going to add a sheet body or a surface, we're going to put it on 11 through 20. Or the solids are on 1 through 10. Okay. In this case, we added a sketch earlier, and the sketches in this particular template was set up to be 21 through 40. Okay, so this is giving you an idea of how we can have different categories, saying that, hey, this group of layers is going to belong to that category based on this object type. We can add more categories, which I'll show you in a minute. You know, maybe there's categories we need for our industry or our business needs. So let's look at that. Now notice this solids group kind of has this ghosted out check mark. If I branch that open, remember earlier I had hidden or made invisible 2 and 3. So this is showing me that something in there has a different status. So if I turn these back on, see how the entire category is back on, visible. You can also turn on and off an entire category. So if I want to get rid of all of the sketches, I could just hit sketches, and if I have them on the proper layers, notice it'll turn those off. Now this particular sketch, this is a good point, what just happened to me. If I turn off sketches, see how this sketch still displays, but notice how layer 22 is my work layer, and 22 is the layer that's on. So if I change my work layer, right now if I hide all those, see how it's going to hide all those particular layers. In this case 21, 22, and 23, actually everything in the category. So I can turn back on all the sketches with one click. Yes, you do have hide and show, right? Just by coming out here and right click and hide and show, or if you're used to the old terminology, blank and unblank. But notice here, having it on a layer in a structure, right? All of us designers or engineers, NX users interacting with the same data, we can have the same layer structure, and if we're all using that, it's going to make it easier for us to interrogate somebody else's model. Okay, so how do we add our own columns? Well, if I branch open all, this was 1 through 256. So let's just come up here and let's start creating another category. Maybe we'll start at 201. So I can come in here and I can do my control and shift range. So I'm going to hold down shift and select 210 to select a range. If I right click, I can say add to category. I can add to an existing category, or I can create a new category on the fly. So those were added to a new category. Right now it's called new category 1. Maybe I have something called construction. That's something that makes sense for our business needs. Okay, so we've added construction. Underneath construction, I have 201 through 210. I'm going to collapse that back. Okay, that was up to 210. So maybe I want to do 211 to 220. Okay, well here you saw that I did a shift range, but up here I can also do something called select layer by range. So if I want to do 211 to 220, see how it automatically selects those for me. So then I can right click, say add to category. I'm going to say new category again. Maybe I want one called reference. Right, so now underneath reference I have 211 to 220. Right, so these categories are just organizing my layers. If I turn off the category display, it'll toggle that back off. Turn it back on, they're listed by category. There's also a filter here. So if I get several categories, I could type in ref, hit enter. Let me put a star at the end, right, because it was reference, and it'll go ahead and basically search the categories. It is case sensitive, so notice I did a capital R. Okay, so we've added categories. I did the select the layer and right click method, right, add to category. You'll also see I can remove the category. Remove from category does not delete the layer, it just removes it from, in this case, sheets or whatever category. You also have the add to category button, which would be the same as this add to category. Alright, a couple other things to wrap up with this particular command. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the sheets so we see the category display. And there is a settings group here, and you'll see the fit all before displaying. So if I zoom out, if I come in here to a specific layer and I turn off that layer, now if I turn on this fit all before displaying, if I say show that layer, it'll automatically fit the screen. So all that's doing, whenever you turn on and off something, it'll automatically fit your screen. So that's what that option does. Okay, we'll talk about the move to layer stuff here in a minute. So let's to show the move to layer, I'm going to go ahead and open up the same model, but I just have a little different formatting to it. So if I look at the layer settings here, I'm going to turn off category display for a minute. So here I have the work layer, and 61 is the only thing with objects. So if you do a new out of the box Siemens template, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the work coordinate system to WCS for a minute for clarity. If I come in here, you see layer 61 has that base coordinate system, right? That datum coordinate system here that starts the template off. So basically everything after that, my work layer was 1. So everything I've done in here, I put it on one particular layer, right? In this case, layer 1. So I want to be able to move these objects after the fact to their proper layers to maintain my standards. I didn't do a good job of changing the work layer before I created geometry. So if I go move to layer, which as we said is also underneath the format pull down menu, I can come up here and say, okay, I want to move this sketch to a layer in the sketches group. I can't remember that it's 21, right? So if I click sketches, see how it's going to put 21, which is the beginning of that range. So maybe I want to put that sketch on layer 21. I'm going to hit apply. Now if I hit OK, it'll dismiss the move to layer dialog and I'd have to come back into it, which is not a problem, but I want to show you that in here you can say, well, let's select new objects, and it's just going to keep repeating the command. So then I can come over here and grab this sketch and say, okay, well, let's put it on sketches. Well, maybe I also want that sketch on layer 21 so they're grouped together, but maybe I want it on its own layer, so I can change that to 22. I'm going to click select new objects. I'm going to grab the datum plane and say, okay, well, that needs to go into datums group. Well, that coordinate system was already on 61. Maybe I want this to be on 62. Okay, so we've went ahead and we've put the sketches on different layers. We put the datum on different layers. The solid body is on layer 1, which is okay. So if I go back to layer settings, right, solids, that was my work layer, which is the solid body. So if I make layer 2 work layer just for a minute, so if I turn off layer 1, that's the solid body. If I branch open sketches, there's 21, which is the rectangular sketch. There's 22, which is the rib sketch. And then underneath datums, we had 61, which was the base coordinate system, and 62, which is the datum plane there. Okay, so you'll see inside of layer settings, I can build my categories, and then after the fact, as I showed you, we can do a move to layer. Okay, if I come back up here to the format menu, there's also a layer category here. Okay, now layer category, you'll see that here's my existing categories. I can create a new category. So earlier I did the example of construction. I can say create/edit. Okay, so that's going to create the construction category, and I can say what layers I want to be in here. So I think we had said 201 to 210. So if I come up here, I can do a shift selection for a range, or I can hold down my left mouse button and drag across what layers I want to be included in this particular category. Then I can say add. Okay, so you can do the same type of thing here with the layer category, or as I showed you earlier, you can add those particular categories by right clicking and saying add to category. Right, if I branch open all, I can say right click, add to category. Right, so there was the construction, 201 to 210. I personally prefer doing the categories here in the layer settings, kind of all one-stop shop, but there's nothing wrong with going to format and setting up your categories here. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it now. I mentioned I would talk about it later, but setting up a template, right? Here I had two separate part files, so I had to redo the work to set up that extra category in this new file. So myself as maybe a CAD administrator or a person in charge of my NX install, maybe I want to set up a template. So whenever I do a file new and I go grab a model template or whatever template or my company standard template, I already have the layer categories set up, right? So when I go ahead and go into model and I go into my layer settings, I have the categories and the range of layers set up, so I don't have to create those each time, right? It's starting new. Now I just use the category and use the layers. All right. The last thing we want to talk about is the layer visible view. I guess I could mention, I'm not going to take the time to show you, we move to layer, but you could also copy to layer. So an object can exist on more than one layer. Okay, layer visible in view. So right now I'm in model space, right? I'm in modeling. So if I come over here and look at my model views, these model views are kind of your default out of the box, your top, front, right, ISO, and so forth. If I come up here and I go to view, operation, and save as, I'm going to do a little obscure view. Yes, we could set this up to be a certain orientation, but here I have this certain orientation I want to save, and I can do save as, and I'm just going to call this my custom view. Okay, so I have a custom view, which is my work view. Alright, so if I come up here, I can say in this particular custom view, I don't want the sketches to be shown. So I can say layers visible in view for my custom view, and I do not want 21, 22, and 23 to be visible. So I can make those invisible, and notice how they turn off for this view. Now one thing that sometimes stumps users is once you've done the layers visible in view, you want to come back and save this view. So I'm going to go to View, Operation, and just say Save. So now if I switch to the right, or one of the other views, right, the sketches are back on. But if I double click and go back to my custom view, it'll set that orientation because that's what the model view does. But notice that layer behavior for that particular view is also saved. So in this case, the sketches are not shown. They're invisible. So layers visible in view works for model views. Also, if I come up here and just to give you a taste here, if I do a drawing, here I'm doing a drawing in the same file. I'm basically creating a sheet in here. So if I grab a particular size sheet, and let's see, let me just do a base view, and I'll do let's just do a top. So right now, make this a little smaller too. Right now, see how it's previewing the coordinate system, the datum plane, basically everything that's displayed in the model. So if I hit close, now remember this is not a master model example. This example is where I did start drafting, right? The drafting sheet is in the same file as the model, so it's using the same layer structure. So if I come back over to the model, and I'm not going to use the layers, but if I do a hide, I just did a Control W, which is show and hide. I can come up here and say, well, I want to hide all sketches and all datums, right? So they're turned off the display here. If I go back to the drawing, right, they're turned off here. But then if I come back down the road and I say, well, go ahead and show all that stuff, right? Show the datums with the plus sign, and show the sketches. So basically I've turned everything back on. But when I go back over to the drawing, all that stuff's back on. So here in the drawing, I can use the layers visible in view. You can do it for a sheet or the view. I'm just going to pick the view in this case, which is selected, and say, well, I do not want anything but the solid body. So I can actually grab everything but the layer the solid body is on and make it invisible. And notice that it turns off all that. So now the only layer that's visible for this view is layer 1, so I don't show the construction geometry. So just a couple of quick examples of layers visible in view for model views and modeling, and then layers visible in view for drawing views for drafting. Alright. Alright, so that wraps up our 30 minutes. Just a reminder, here's the web page so you can see upcoming topics and dates. You see here I took a screenshot from our website. Today was the the CAD layers for November 6th. We'll also be doing a CAM Lunch Bites, the next one on December 11th for you CAM guys, for our next CAM. You can get to our Lunch Bite replays here. Here's where you can suggest the topic for Lunch Bites. Some upcoming training offerings. If you follow those, you can go to our website for more information. We do have our advanced classes scheduled. Something that we've been asked quite a bit for is version updates. So if you're moving from NX8 to NX9 or NX7.5 to NX9, you can inquire on our website or send us an email if you're interested in some training classes around what's new. Also keep in mind we have our What's New Lunch Bites. Those replays will be on our website. I appreciate everyone's attention this afternoon. I hope you found this session informative. We wanted to get you introduced on what layers are and how the layer commands work. Give you a taste of that. I encourage you to play around with some of these commands when you get some time. You can, like I said earlier, please email us your suggestions for topics. You can also suggest them on our website. Email us any questions you may have had during the session. Appreciate your time, and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks, and have a great day.